Here we go! Here we go! Here we go!
We're gonna have a fiery Sterling today.
Well, no, you just have a big old air horn, and anytime a Packers fan tries to talk, you just hit the button and drown them out. Like, no, I can't hear you. Go Bears.
It's basically the la 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 la.
Yeah, exactly. Right? You don't even have to live there. You can do it from here. Just remote control everything. Yeah, I'm pissed off, man. Fuck the NFL at this point.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the OneIq Football Talk Podcast as we get ready for another week. Again, no real podcast last week. Again, some time constraints really didn't allow it to happen, and there wasn't a crazy amount to talk about last week. So ultimately, we just decided that we would lump in some things from last week that we want to talk about this week. And but first off, Sterling, my friend, how you doing?
I'm all right. It's been a week for me. You know, I'm dealing with some stuff, and it's nasty outside, so I'm just sort of powering through this week as well. You know, that's the tough thing. We reached this, you know, almost holiday push of the year from, you know, November, December, and it's happened the last couple of years with our podcasts where we just aren't always able to get it out. Thankfully, we have lots of other content coming at you guys, so we feel like we can get away with it a little more now, which is nice because it gets so busy with work and, you know, parties and got to see family and do all this other stuff, and now there's like 3 feet of snow on the ground suddenly.
It's depressing as hell.
It is depressing. Like I wish I was in Vegas right now, man.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's been an interesting week in the football world. One of the things that was very interesting to watch throughout this week was the saga of Daniel Jones, of where they benched him over the bye week, and then it was okay. This is going to be interesting because are they going to, like, is he going to be the backup? Is he going to be the third string? Then it was announced, oh, he's going to be the third string. And then I think it was like Monday or Tuesday, they signed a quarterback and they said to Daniel Jones, you're going to be the fourth string, so you aren't even getting reps. You are literally standing there. Now, the reason the Giants ultimately did that is because if Daniel Jones was to get injured, they would owe him $10 million. And they were looking, like, I think most of us thought that this was just going to be Daniel Jones. We're just trying to mutually agree that you're just going to go home for the rest of the year, and we're not going to worry about you, and then we will release you at the end of the year. And that was going to be the situation because, again, you get demoted to fourth string quarterback. That's a pretty low bar at that point. Everyone pretty much knew the writing was on the wall. And then Daniel Jones the next day comes out with a press conference with basically a thank you apology, kind of burning the organization a little bit, a press conference where everyone was just like, you're saying a lot of things that would be said from a guy leaving a team, but you're still on this team, Danny Dimes. The hell?
Yeah, it felt like he was basically laying his cards out in there. He's like, balls in your court, New York. I'm out. Like, it was mic drop moment for him. He's like, thank you, goodbye to all the fans. It's been great, except it hasn't. It's been absolute shit, and I can't wait to leave this place. And then the organization really had no choice. Whether they were planning to do it or not, the very next day, they sort of had to come out and go, yeah, we gave him his walking papers.
Yeah, it was one of those things where he went in the next day and said to the GM, he's like, release me. And the GM was like, okay. Yeah. And like I will say, like, like, good on the Giants for allowing him to be released at that point. Like, they just said, like, listen, like, he wanted out, and it was the best move for everyone involved. Like, I remember I quote tweeted something just like, this is the best for both parties. The Giants wipe their hands of Daniel Jones. They don't have to think about him. They don't have to deal with him. And Daniel Jones doesn't have to be in that New York market. He's going to be a free agent. Is he going to sign anywhere? Who knows? I know if, pardon me, if I was a quarterback needy team, I wouldn't sign him. Like, both of us have consistently thought that he was the worst quarterback in football, even with Deshaun Watson looking like he was a better person than he was a quarterback, which is a hard thing to say. We both still thought that Daniel Jones was pretty bad to the point that he was the worst. Like, I don't even know if he was a top 50 quarterback in the NFL. But if he clears waivers, which he will, because I don't imagine a single team is going to be like, yes, thank you.
Well,
But,
and at that price, that's the thing. Because
Yeah.
with those waivers, you pick him up now and you're like, yeah, we'll pay him $45 million to come here.
Mhm.
That being said, we know what a mess that Giants organization is. And while Daniel Jones has been, consensus the worst quarterback out there, I do have some skepticism about whether that was 100% on his shoulders or not.
Oh, it
And
definitely
so
wasn't.
I could definitely see a team that's quarterback needy and just in need of just something different going, are you willing to come play for us for the league minimum for the remainder of this year? We're not going to give you like an extended contract or anything like that.
That's
And just
exactly
come
what it's
over.
going to be. Like,
Exactly. And there are teams that I could see doing that, and the Raiders honestly are probably top of my list for possibly doing something like that, because they're like, we don't have a quarterback anyway, and we know we're going to be drafting one this year. Do you want to come here and see if you can just spark things and maybe help develop some of these guys? I don't know. There's a couple of teams that I could see doing this, but it's going to be on a very league minimum. It's going to be on terms of just to the end of this season, and then you're a free agent again. There's going to be a lot of hoops for Daniel Jones to have to jump through to do it, and it's going to be messy for him. I'm glad that $45 million contract is off the books now. Unfortunately, it's still completely messed up the quarterback market when it happened, and now that we're in this cycle of $65 million quarterbacks, that's what it's going to be.
75 or $70 million now.
Right. I am curious to see what else comes.
Yeah, me too. Like, I do think Daniel Jones will end up signing with the team. Like, I wonder if Dallas, because you and I we messaged each other that would be the funniest thing for the Cowboys to do is, oh, we're gonna sign Daniel Jones, play him immediately as the starting quarterback against the Giants, and hope that he wins. Just how funny would that be? But you could look there. You could look at a team, for instance, like the Jags. The Jags might do it. They might look at Mac Jones and go, we're not really satisfied with what you can do. Depending on how long Brock Purdy is out, could the 49ers say, hey, do you want to know what a real coaching staff looks like? Do you want to know what a real supporting cast looks like? And maybe, just maybe, like, he inflates his value. And there's going to be teams. It would be hilarious to see the Jets pick him up just to keep him in New York, just to have that. And but yeah, neither of us think he's getting picked up off of waivers at that price tag. But I wonder if it's going to be a week, if it's going to be 2 weeks from now, if he even gets signed, because I do believe that he will be signed as a backup going into next season. I don't think either of us really think that's something that's not going to happen. But man, this Giants organization with that Daniel Jones contract, because I was screaming at the rooftops. I said, listen, if you want to re-sign Daniel Jones, do it, because you can't lose him after that playoff season for nothing. But you can't give him $45 million a year. I said, the second that you do that, you are going to be the laughingstock of the NFL for years and years to come. And they didn't even make it 2 full years after that contract.
Nope. And then they doubled down and were like, want to see me do it again? And they let Saquon Barkley walk away and go to the Eagles.
Yeah.
That's why it would be so unbelievably funny for Daniel Jones to go to the Cowboys, have him be the starter on that Thanksgiving Day game, which is honestly going to be a snooze fest anyway. That would actually inject some life into that game, maybe.
It would definitely have a story for sure.
Right? But beyond that, like, I don't know what's going to happen. This could be the end of Daniel Jones in the NFL even. You know, he
Very
might
well
get something for a bit here. He might not even get a backup spot next year. He may end up going to the UFL or having to come north of the border to play in the CFL or something like that. It'd be really funny to see Mac Jones and Daniel Jones down in Jacksonville, though. You know, the Jones quarterbacks filling in for Trevor Lawrence.
How funny would it be to see both Mac Jones and Daniel Jones make their way up to the CFL and just do that? Like that would be hilarious. Of just going, oh, like both these former first round picks who just sucked. One guy got paid $45 million a season to play quarterback in a major market, and now he's playing for the Blue Bombers or the Argonne or the Stamps.
I don't think either one of them would be successful up here anyway.
God, no.
You know, we know it's still football, but it's different, and we've seen a lot of NFL players try to come to Canada and play in the CFL, and it just rarely translates.
Yeah.
In the same way that we rarely see a
CFL guy go up there.
CFL guy go down to the NFL and succeed. There have been some, but usually they end up being second stringers, you know, like Alex Singleton. You know, I think the biggest names that we've ever seen do it are Doug Flutie and Jeff Garcia.
Calais Campbell, another one as well.
Yep, Calais Campbell.
Yeah, but like we're kind of in that era now. Yeah, we're in that era now where if you're a CFL guy and your goal is to make it to the NFL, you are going to have to be so elite that I know there was a guy that played for Toronto last year that got drafted. I'm pretty sure he got drafted by the Bengals, and he was looking pretty decent this year. I would have to look that up, but regardless, the Daniel Jones situation has finally come to an end. We all kind of figured that it was going to come to an end at the end of the year, but man, oh man, you just look back at this draft class this year, at who they could have gone after at pick number 6. Again, you still had both Bo Nix, you had Michael Penix, you had there's at least one more quarterback that
JJ McCarthy was still there at that
JJ
point.
McCarthy was still available at that point, and you decided again. Now, granted, I still think Malik Neighbors was the right pick, but you had the opportunity to go get your quarterback at that point, and now the Giants, because of how many wins they have this year, I forget how many. I think it's 3 so far this year.
It's 2 or 3. It's not good.
I think it's 2 at this point, but it's one of those things where they're competing for the first overall pick, and they're in this scenario where you're not going to be in financial hell, but you're also not going to be in a great situation financially wise. But it's just bad. But we can continue to laugh at the Giants for being just a very piss poor organization.
Yeah, I mean they've made their bed, now they got to lie in it.
Yep.
You know, we said way back then, don't give Daniel Jones that long-term contract. Lock up Barkley, not Jones. That was your star player. They made that mistake, and now they've got to live with it. They've got to play it out.
They get to watch
If they
Barkley
can get themselves a rookie quarterback this year, then that will speed up the process for them to be able to recover from this. Because like we've said, their defense is good. They have one of the better defenses out there. They have Malik Neighbors. Tracy Jr., who they just drafted last year, is emerging as
he's
top
looking
young
like a
running
guy.
back. You know, and so between that, you get a quarterback in there, you get some offensive line pieces. You could be back on that trajectory to be competitive in that NFC East within 2 years. You know, and then that Daniel Jones contract comes off the books at that point, and you go, okay, now we can seriously start talking about building up. So, you know, they didn't put themselves in a position like, say, the Saints, where you've got 5-6 years of potential cap hell and having to sell your players off and just run with rookies and hopefuls. The Giants could bounce back from this fairly quickly if they do it the right way.
Yeah.
But the decision making over the last 2 years, I think you got to make a change at general manager at this point. You know, letting Barkley walk is easily the biggest blunder of any GM, in my opinion, in the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, the fact that, and thank God that we got to watch the Giants on Hard Knocks this offseason for the offseason. I think honestly Hard Knocks is best suited for in-season and the off-season, because the preseason, again, my Bears were on that, but it just, it almost feels like it fuels you with like false hopes with certain things. And again, like, I'm not just saying that because my team was on there and there was so much hype in this, that, and the other thing. We see other teams during the preseason where it's just like you get this false sense of reality. But again, I love the offseason one because it shows you a little bit more. And we got to see the owner walk into the GM's room and go, all right, because my big fear is losing him to the Eagles, because we know the Eagles are going to target him, and go, do we think the Eagles are going to do that? Oh, no, we think they're going to go after this running back. And they have DeAndre Swift. And it's like, oh, they lost DeAndre Swift? Oh, they're signing him? Oh. It, like, again, it is just pure and utter chaos that is just so unbelievably funny to watch. And again, they can easily fix this in a pretty short amount of time, but I would expect to see both general manager and likely a head coaching change. And that brings us to one of our main points of this week's video, which is one of the things that we've been talking about a little bit throughout this year, but we're starting to kind of get to that point of where even a lot of the main writers like Tom Pelissero, they're writing about their top coaching candidates. And so for us, we're looking at it and going, where do we think the current availabilities of coaches are going to be, and which teams do we think are going to potentially have a head coach move at the end of the year? Again, the only teams we know for a fact are going to be looking for a new head coach are the New York Jets and the New Orleans Saints. But we kind of chatted about it over the last day or so about some of the teams, and we ultimately came down to, we think there are 10 potential teams that we could see looking for head coaches. That is including the Jets and the Saints. But we'll quickly rifle off some of the teams that we think will ultimately look to fire their head coaches. The Chicago Bears, it seems like they're going to go down that direction. The Dallas Cowboys, Jacksonville Jaguars, Las Vegas Raiders, New York Giants, the Cleveland Browns. Now, we have two teams that could look, there's one team that is looking more likely that they could potentially move on. One that's a little bit more of a stretch, but it's a situation where it's very believable that they could go down this route. The first one that is a little bit more believable, it is the Cincinnati Bengals. They've had a pretty rough year. Zach Taylor could be a candidate to be moved on from because it's just hasn't really worked out. Now, has Zach Taylor been the problem for the Bengals? No, but he also hasn't been the solution either. And the other team that is getting a lot of talk, surprisingly, that I know when I initially sent you this team, you kind of looked at me and you just went, shut up, no. And that is the San Francisco 49ers. And the reason why I have had them on this particular list of going, they could move on from Kyle Shanahan, is I think a lot of people forget that this 49ers organization, before they got Shanahan, before they got their GM, they were a bit of a broken organization where it was just hire head coach, fire him, hire head coach, fire him, hire head coach, fire him. And again, when they had Jim Harbaugh, they were good, but they kind of stumbled into that situation. And then when he left for Michigan, they kind of went into that routine of everyone's looking at this 49ers organization going, man, they just can't get it right. And then they stumbled upon Kyle Shanahan and everyone kind of forgot about it. And, for Kyle Shanahan, one of the things that we've been talking about with him is neither of us think that he is going to win a Super Bowl with the 49ers. We view him very much as Andy Reid 2.0, of where he's just not going to be able to get it done with his team, where he's constantly making great playoff pushes and doing this, that, and the other thing, and he's doing so good, but he just can't get it done. And we think he's going to move on to another team, and he's ultimately going to get a Super Bowl with that second team. Now, you could be looking at this for Kyle Shanahan and saying he might just say, listen, guys, we might just need a split. It's time to move on. And the organization might look at it and go, we agree. the 49ers haven't been great this year. Now, they've dealt with a ton of injuries, but even then, he could be looking at going like, let's just wipe the table clean, guys.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of been the issue with the 49ers the last few years, and it's something we always talk about at the beginning of the season and throughout, where the 49ers healthy are one of the best teams, but as soon as they start battling those injuries, they deteriorate rapidly and are no longer in that top tier conversation. And look at them this year. They're sitting at 500. You know, depending on how yesterday's game against the Packers went, they could be below 500 now. And yeah, when you first presented it to me, you were like, oh, a lot of fans are saying that this could be happening. And I was like, well, then they're not fans, they're idiots.
Yes.
But as we discussed it more, and you're like, well, it could be a mutual thing with Kyle Shanahan even going, look, it's just not working. We're just treading
time.
water. And at that point, I'm like, that is a good point. Kyle Shanahan could look at the organization at the same time as they're looking at him, and they just go, we need a change of coach, and you need a change of scenery. Let's just get this done amicably. No hard feelings. Let's move on. And at that point, especially if this team ends up being like a 6 or 7 win team and missing the playoffs after all the aspirations and high hopes and massive contracts, because they have some of the biggest contracts in the league with some of the biggest star players, to miss the playoffs, that is something where you do maybe need to consider making that change.
Yeah, and just going back to what you're saying about the mutual split, that's exactly what happened with Andy Reid and the Eagles. They just kind of looked at each other and they said, it's time. Like, neither of us really want to do this, but we just have to shake our hands and say, you know what, we're better off apart at this moment. Now, I would say Andy Reid definitely got the better deal out of that, because obviously he went to KC, was just really, really successful, found Patrick Mahomes, but the Eagles still have had great success with that.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. That very much was a win-win, because the Eagles also did win a Super Bowl after that split happened.
Yes, they did.
And so that's something where that split resulted in both sides winning
Ultimately
at least
having
one Super Bowl.
the best circumstance for either
Yeah.
of them, for sure. But it's one of those things. So that is the reason why we are including the 49ers in this list, is because, again, at this point for the 49ers, again, we were recording this on a Saturday. It's going to be posted on Monday. We're just looking at this going, again, it's not looking great for them against the Packers. Brock Purdy and Nick Bosa are both going to be out. You got to wonder, how long is Brock Purdy going to be out? And let's just say they win 7 games this year, miss the playoffs. And I think both sides just come to that agreement of going, it's been great. It's been I think 7 years that they've been together. And for a head coach, that's a pretty good stretch of time to stay in one place. Like, I think the average time for a head coach is like 3-4 years at one location, unless you get like that really long run of form for you. Obviously, you're sitting back going like, no, it's like 20
I'm not
years.
familiar with that. You mean you put the 3 and the 4 together and make that a number, right?
No.
Yeah.
No. But it is one of those situations. So that's kind of the explanation of why we are including the 49ers in this list. Now, if you were to ask me the odds of, even if the 49ers lose out the rest of the year, would they fire Kyle Shanahan, or they would mutually part ways, I would say it's still very low. I would say it's like a 25% chance of happening. This is just the fun thought experiment of the day.
Yep.
But we aren't going to include them. Again, 10 head coaches seems like a lot, but last year we had 8. I'm pretty sure a few years ago we had 10. Like, I don't think it would be a crazy shock to see this number. There's guaranteed not a chance that we'll see more than this. But ultimately, we both kind of looked at it and went, what are the situations for each of these teams, and which team looks the most attractive for all of these coaching candidates to go to? Because there's a lot of really, really good coaching candidates this year where teams are going to be able to find someone. And ultimately, we both kind of looked at it and said, the best job that would be available would be that 49ers job, because that is a Super Bowl ready team. And it was just, again, they just needed to kind of mutually part ways. They battled with injuries this year. Now, the biggest downside with that 49ers team is you're going to likely have to pay Brock Purdy $70 million. And you better hope that you are going to be capable of doing what Kyle Shanahan did with Brock Purdy and yourself filling in that role. So you have to be comfortable with that. But ultimately, you have unbelievably great weapons who are locked up. You have great offense, or you still need to improve your offensive line, but it's still a very good one. Your defense is phenomenal. Again, it could get a little bit better, but ultimately, it's still very good. It's a Super Bowl caliber team that is just looking for a change. That's all it really is. So they, without a doubt, are the number one team for our availability. I don't know if you have anything.
I mean, it's a great situation with all those offensive pieces. Brock Purdy is still my only question mark too. I he's gone from Mr. Relevant to, is he going to get $70 million? I'd like to see what he can do without Kyle Shanahan as a head coach.
Yes.
Before I give him that money, because is it him or is it Shanahan? And
Correct.
So I think that could be another reason for this move happening, is the organization going, let's see how he does with somebody else before we give him $70 million.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. Now, second on our list, I know a lot of people are going to hear this and go, well, Brendan, you're a Bears fan. Of course you think that job is going to be attractive. But even when I first brought this to you in our kind of like pre-show meetings, you kind of initially went that kind of side eye. But the more I explained it, you're like, okay, like I get it. I do think the Bears are the second most attractive job. And if the 49ers weren't there, I think it would be the most attractive job. I thought the Bears last year, if they fired Matt Eberflus like I wished them to do, they were the most attractive job. 2 top 10 picks ended up becoming Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. I still think most people view the idea of coaching Caleb Williams and him being a really good quarterback as a really good option. You have Rome Odunze, you have DJ Moore, you have Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift. If you use him properly, he looks really, really good. You need to work on the offense, that on the offensive line. That is an area that you will need to work on. The defense is still solid. Now, again, has it been as good as we have hoped it was going to be this year? No, but it is still a phenomenal defense. And if you're really only looking at it going, we need to kind of bolster that offensive line. Well, guess what? You're going to have 3 top 50 picks, and you also have almost $90 million in cap space. Now, they've cut Nate Davis. That helps out. And the way that you get to that just shy under 90 million is you're going to have to cut DeMarcus Walker. He's going into his final year next year anyways. And if you do that, you're going up to 90 or just shy under 90 million. I think it's like 89.6 or something million dollars for that season. So you're going to have a ton of space to work with. And again, when you have a team like the Bears that has really only been missing the coaching staff, that is why we think that they could be the second best option.
Yeah. And I mean, the reason I was skeptical and still am is the ownership gets in their own way in Chicago.
Yes.
That's been the reason you can't get a coaching staff is because they keep picking the wrong guys and then just running them out of town after a very short stint. And that's the problem. You get this constant, just revolving door of coaches, and it's nothing
it's
changes.
rough. It's
and
really
that's
rough.
the concern. And that was my thing, is like the Bears really right now, it needs to be an offensive minded head coach, which, for me, I don't say that often because I'm more of that defensive mind. But this is a situation where it has to be an offensive minded head coach. And honestly, I think any of the candidates that sit down for this, they need to look at the ownership group and go, I need a little bit of veto power. If you guys are trying to bring somebody in and I'm like,
He's
he
not going to
doesn't
work.
fit, he's not going to work with what I want to do, I need to be able to say no and have you listen to me. Because we've seen it with so many of these coaches where they may not be the offensive mind, they may be more the defensive, but either way, they look at it and they go, well, why are you bringing him here? He's not really, he doesn't fit with the scheme we're playing. And the ownership and the GM just go, well, too bad, make it work. And it doesn't work. And so the coaches, I think anybody who wants this Bears job has to go, you need to let me be set up for success. If you're going to set me up for failure, I don't want this job.
Yeah. You
Yeah.
you need to allow me to do my job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next up is, I think, the Cincinnati Bengals, and I think we both look at this and go, the defense on this team is brutal. You're likely going to be losing T. Higgins this offseason. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase a stupid amount of money this offseason. But with that being said, you have Joe Burrow. You are going to be able to work with Joe Burrow. He is the only active Mahomes killer in the entire NFL. And when I say Mahomes killer, I mean guy that is capable of beating him in the playoffs. You can beat him in the you can beat him in the regular season. That's fine. Aiden O'Connell beat Patrick Mahomes in the regular season. Until you get to the postseason, that is where it really matters. And Joe Burrow is the only guy in the NFL right now that has shown that he can beat Mahomes in the postseason other than Tom Brady. And Tom Brady is the only other guy to do it. And he did it twice, and he's retired. He's the owner of the Raiders now, or he's a part owner of the Raiders. And having that level of a guy on your team is a very, very, very attractive thing to have happen. But there is still a lot of things that you're going to have to fix, like that defense and trying to find that true number 2 wide receiver beside Jamar Chase. But other than that, like, that is an attractive job, man.
Yeah, this is a very attractive one for sure. And I mean, for myself, the odds on this one happening is much higher than the 49ers because
massively.
We've said it for a while. Zach Taylor sort of fell into this job and then had Joe Burrow fall into his lap.
Yeah.
And I think Joe Burrow has been the reason for this team winning more than Zach Taylor.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for this team losing is usually more Zach Taylor than Joe Burrow. And so that's why I think it's time for this team to part ways with Taylor. And for them, it makes for an interesting situation because you could go with a guy like, that's more offensive minded, that's going to really utilize Joe Burrow's weapons. Or you could go that defensive minded route and be like, well, this is the AFC North and defense kind of runs this division when you're competing against each other. And so a defensive mind might be a good option to build that defense up because you know that no matter who the coach is, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are going to be able to do special things. And so that's where that's going to be an interesting one to see which direction they go for their head coach.
Yep. The only other real attractive job that we kind of looked at, and that is the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this is one of those jobs that I don't think either of us are confident is going to be available because Antonio Pierce, as he is technically first-year head coach for this team, it hasn't been sunshine and rainbows over there in Vegas. They were expecting a lot more. I said it was either going to go one of two ways for Vegas. They were going to be this team, what they are right now, or they were going to be a 10-win team that everyone's going like, God damn, like even without a quarterback, they're still doing this. And Antonio Pierce is doing great work and this, that, the other thing. But I do think the Raiders are one of those teams where it's kind of a flip of the coin whether they will keep AP or they won't keep him. It's going to be really interesting. Again, Antonio Pierce's hire of Luke Getsy, we all know my reaction to that was like, you guys just did a very dumb job here. And again, they fumbled the bag with Cliff Kingsbury as their OC because they hired him and then they just couldn't come down to terms of contract. And yeah, they're going to have a rookie quarterback coming in this year because they're fighting for that number 1 spot. But pretty much the Raiders are the only job that I would say are really still attractive.
Yeah, I would agree. Being that you're going to have, even if not the number 1 pick, you're going to have a top 5 pick. You're going to be able to get the potential quarterback of your future in there. You have what is at this point looking like the Hall of Fame tight end that you just drafted last year. Like, he has potential. Like, if he keeps going this way, he's going to be the best to ever do it.
Yeah.
And that defense, they can stay healthy, should be one of the best. But that's the problem is so many of those guys are so big, they're having problems staying healthy right now. But that's a next year problem. It definitely is an attractive job if it becomes available, just due to that high draft pick, the solid defense, and the location. Who doesn't want to go to Vegas and hang out in the sunshine and coach a team?
Exactly. Next up is the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, this is the thing where pretty much the positives are you're going to have a high draft pick. You're likely going to be able to trade that pick for a team that is really quarterback needy. So you're going to get a little bit even more draft pick or draft capital out of that. And you're going to be able to kind of build this team. But the problem is that you're going to have to deal with that Trevor Lawrence contract because they gave him a ton of money last offseason that's going to kick in next season, and you better hope that you can get Trevor Lawrence playing like what everyone thought he was going to be, because other than that, if you can't do that, you are going to be in a situation of where they're just going to fire you, because again, they're paying so much money to him and they drafted him first overall and this and that, and it's just always been underperformance, and that's a reason why we're seeing Doug Peterson going to be fired, because he hasn't maximized Trevor Lawrence yet. And so to me, it's a little bit unattractive because you are still going to have to build this team because it's not a great roster, and you have to kind of live with the fact that you're going to have to deal with Trevor Lawrence. And we kind of looked at each other and went, it's not as bad as that Daniel Jones contract, but it's a lot for a guy that hasn't shown us that he can be an elite quarterback yet.
Yeah, I mean, this Jags, it's sort of on the middle peg there,
Yeah.
like it's not attractive, but it's not really unattractive either. If you're a head coach that's got that offensive mind and you're comfortable with Trevor Lawrence, you could definitely get this team rolling. The biggest issue in Jacksonville, in my opinion, has been the GM's team building ability.
Yes.
Like they haven't given Trevor Lawrence a lot of great weapons. I don't think they expected the drop off from losing Calvin Ridley to be this drastic, but it was. For me, Trevor Lawrence is the best losing bad quarterback in the league right now. He's had good stats. He's had good opportunities. He just has a lot of drops, which falls down to his supporting cast more than his ability. And so that's something where it's going to be a coach that's going to be able to work with a quarterback and a team that maybe doesn't have as many weapons as they need, but finding a way to make it work. And so that it could be attractive to somebody that has a lot of confidence to be able to do that.
Yeah. Next up on our list is the Dallas Cowboys, as I think a lot of us would have thought that this would have been a lot lower down on the list, because again, you're going to have to go into a team where you're paying a lot of money to Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, and you're probably going to lose out on Micah Parsons because he's going to probably go because he's going to be too expensive. But the biggest problem there is you're just going to have to deal with the Jones family, like Jerry Jones and his son and just everyone else in that. Like you're going into Jerry's world, and that's not a fun world to be in. And last time they were looking for a head coach, we said pretty much the same thing of why would you want to go to Dallas? Because you're literally going to have to deal with Jerry Jones, and that hasn't changed. But the teams that we have below the Cowboys, they're just in such a far worse situation.
They are, and really the only reason the Cowboys are is because it's the Dallas Cowboys. Like the fact that it is the name that they have, like that is what really elevates them up that little bit more, because
yes,
they're soon going to be in that same sort of cap hell position that we see these following teams at, because like you said, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott getting paid a lot of money now. It's going to be hard to put pieces around them, because as those pieces gain success, they're going to want more money, and you're going to have to trade them away because you won't be able to afford them.
Yep. Next up is the New York Giants. Again, we kind of talked about this with the Daniel Jones situation. We do kind of think that team is going to be ultimately in the scenario of where they're just going to be moving on from someone, and right head coach comes in, does the job drafting the young quarterback. But again, this offense, even if you do draft a young quarterback, The offensive line isn't amazing. You only have Malik Neighbors. The running back there, we think he's starting to look really, really good. But again, he's still in that early stage of where it's like, okay, like he's showing that he can be good, but can he be great? It's a long road to go. And obviously dealing with that Daniel Jones contract still, because they are still going to have to deal with a little bit of that money, is also going to hurt you. But it's just kind of down there where you're going to be in that scenario of where if you're a coach, like this is going to be the long haul and I need to kind of make the right move this offseason for the quarterback to convince them to keep me here for a while, or for past that 3-year mark of when we kind of finally don't have to deal with that Jones contract anymore. But yeah, that's kind of why we have the Giants there.
Yeah, the Giants, this is going to be a job where if you take it, it's because you want an opportunity to rebuild a team. This is one of those ones where I could see it being a GM head coach duo that they're really good friends and they come in together to do it. This could even be one of those rare situations where
Like
we
what
see
happened
it
with the
be
Giants last
a
time.
guy that it's a GM head coach opportunity. It's like you're the head coach and the GM, you're decisions and you're running. We don't see it very often in the NFL anymore. But this Giants organization, where they're at right now, I could see them trying to make some sort of a splash that way.
The only reason why I would disagree with that take is because look at their GM and look at their head coach. They both hired the same year, both came from the Bills organization. That is the only reason why I think they would try to steer away from that, is because the last time they did it, it's kind of put them in the result that we're seeing now. But yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. Next job, that's the New Orleans Saints, and it's just plain and simple. You're $77 million over the cap going into next offseason. So you're going to have to clear $77 million to just get to even.
Mm-hmm.
And the team's not great. So you're going to have to do all of that. Like I think it's fair to say that the New Orleans Saints for next year's draft, not 2025, but 2026, should be your favorites for that first overall pick. But here's the thing, is once you start to get some of those bad contracts off the board, you could look at it and go, this is a situation of where we can start to potentially build something. And if you can get a coach that says, I'm in it for the long haul and I understand that it's not going to be pretty right away, you can make that work. But again, just that situation of they're in right now where you are in all sorts of hell. Like you are far down this list.
Yeah, that's exactly it. This is a spot where you need to be a coach that you're coming in, going all in, and being like, look, I get it. This is a full-on rebuild. You're going to need to be on the same page with whoever the GM is there at that point as well. It's going to be a very ugly road with a potentially great payoff if you're able to do enough so that the ownership doesn't get frustrated and fire you too early.
Next up, we have the Cleveland Browns. Again, the second worst spot. Again, going to the Browns, it just kind of feels like a disaster situation, because we talked about the Saints being in cap problems. We talked about the Giants having to deal with Daniel Jones's contract. Well, guess what? The Browns have to deal with Deshaun Watson's contract, being that fully guaranteed. No matter what, if you cut him, you are still paying him. So there's no incentive to cut him at this point because you're still paying him that money. But that defense is still very, very good, but you're going to have to rehaul the entire offense. You're likely going to have to rehaul the entire defense in a year or two. And so to just do that, it is just such an unattractive job, because again, going to Cleveland, you're going to have to deal with the Steelers twice a year. You're going to have to deal with the Ravens twice a year. You're going to have to deal with the Bengals twice a year. And you're going to have to get so much right to potentially make this work. It is just going to be a very hard look for me to see a team or see this being a real attractive job. This is one of those ones where you just kind of get one of those coaches that's just like, yeah, I'll happily take the job because I want a head coaching job. Similar to the Bengals job before Zach, or when Zach Taylor got there, where it was just no one wants to go there. And Zach Taylor was probably a year or two away from getting that head coaching job. And he kind of got it this year because no one else wanted to take the job. And they're like, screw it. We'll give it to you because you're the only one that's actually showing interest.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, the thing with this Browns job is there hasn't been a lot of discussion about whether, the Browns are going to fire Kevin Stefanski. I think the bigger thing here is Kevin Stefanski may decide to walk away because he's frustrated with the Browns.
Yeah.
Like he has no say in it. He was wanting to move away from Deshaun Watson earlier before the injury even happened, and he was
Yes.
not permitted to do so. I think that's the point where he threw his hands up and was like, I need out of this place. And if that does happen, I think Stefanski has the opportunity to be a outlier, a wild card for some of these other coaching jobs that are there, because a lot of people might not be considering him as a possibility. Where once he's available, you go, well, look what he did with that Browns team, though. Like he
Yeah.
was one of the better coaches and had a team that was
He's won Coach of the Year, I think, twice now.
right, and that on a bad team usually. So that bodes well for him going forward. I think it's time for him to free himself from the Cleveland Browns organization, and hopefully he just doesn't land himself in another spot that is unfavorable that way.
Yeah. And finally, last team on our list and it's simple. It's the New York Jets. The Jets are just continuing to be the dumpster fire of the NFL. And the owner fired the GM a few weeks ago, and now there's a lot of rumors that he wanted to, bench Aaron Rodgers after week 4, and it doesn't sound like he's going to allow whoever the GM and coach coming in to keep Aaron Rodgers. So at this point, you're looking at this Jets team that is only getting older because Devonta Adams is going to be, 33 next year. Garrett Wilson just simply might say, I'm out, because he has not been happy this year. The defense has been so turbulent of where they've had a good game, then they've had bad games. You're going to have to find a new starting quarterback. Whether Aaron Rodgers wants to stay another year or not, you're going to have to likely find a new top young wide receiver. Like this Jets job is just such a mess, and working for the Jets owner right now, it's kind of like what we saw from the Panthers owner and from the Commanders owner for years, where we're just like, man, like, why would you want to work for that guy? Like, Woody Johnson is not a guy that you really want to work for. At least with Jerry Jones, he wants the best for the football team, and he's not getting it right, and he needs to completely move away and just be the owner and do his media appearances but not be the GM. But like with Woody Johnson, he just seems like he is just a nightmare to work for.
Yeah, that Jets job's going to be messy because you're essentially starting from scratch, but with a bunch of old dudes. You're like you said, the ownership doesn't really want Aaron Rodgers back next year. He's shown this year he doesn't have it anymore. It's time for Aaron Rodgers to retire.
Yeah.
Like you see his stat lines and you go, he's healthy. What's the problem? And it's dude's 42.
Yep.
That's an old age to be playing quarterback at a high level in this league.
Not
So
everyone can be Tom Brady.
this is a job where I feel like it's going to be a young up and comer who wants a challenge, or it's going to be a guy who didn't necessarily have a great outing his last time as a head coach, and the team's willing to take a gamble, and it's sort of one of the only places where he might get that opportunity type of deal.
Yeah, and for us, we had a list of candidates that we went over. Again, like I sent Sterling an article that had a bunch of guys, but I also sent him my own group of coaches that I think would make head coaches, and he sent a few guys that he thinks as well. But not all the guys that were on our list ended up getting hired in our own mind. So each of us, we're gonna go over the teams that we just spoke of and think of who we think some of the candidates are, but ultimately who we think the team is going to hire. Again, we're not going to be very similar in a lot of these. We're probably going to have a lot of them similar, but ultimately have probably a bunch that are different as well. Again, I'm under the opinion of you don't win in today's NFL without a strong offensive-minded head coach. Sterling, I know you are more of the line of you just need to have a good CEO style head coach that is able to allow his coordinators to do what it is. Basically, try to find Mike Tomlin.
Well, yeah, like I do agree with you that in this league, the way it is right now, an offensive-minded head coach is going to give you much better opportunities to win.
Yeah.
what I sort of go into it with is there are some situations with some teams where the offensive mind isn't necessarily what you need in the head coaching role. You need more of a leader with the ability to bring in a good offensive mind to be your coordinator. It is risky, as we've seen, because often what happens is then that OC is there for a year or two and then moves on. So
Yep.
it makes it difficult. But that is why those head coaches need to be such strong leaders, because you need to have that ability to go, okay, well, I was coaching with this guy. He's moved on. We've got somebody new that I brought in now. We're not going to miss a beat. You need to be able to do that as that leader,
Yes.
more defensive minded head coach. There
That
aren't very many
CEO
of them.
style coach.
Exactly. There aren't very many of them, but they do still exist in the league. The
Without
the
a doubt.
Harbaughs are among them.
Mhm.
Not just Mike Tomlin. The Harbaughs are very much that style.
Oh, you look
And
at
so
Dan Campbell as well. You
exactly. And
throw
so
him
there
out
there are
there.
some. Dan Campbell was a little more on the offensive. I mean, he was a tight end coach and
Yeah,
more on that offensive side of the ball, but he does value defense more than some of these offensive minded coordinators and head
without a
coaches
doubt.
out there
Yeah,
do.
he
But yeah,
allows
so
his guys to go out there and do their jobs as coordinators.
yeah, I likely will have a couple of defensive candidates for a few of these jobs where I think it's more leadership that's lacking on the team as opposed to offensive ability that's lacking on the team, if that makes sense. There's some, like I mentioned with the Bears, where under no circumstance do you go with a defensive minded head coach. It's not leadership, it's not defense you need a guy who's basically a quarterback whisperer. There are some jobs out there that are very much that situation. There's just one or two where I could see that defensive mind squeaking in there because it's the change of culture that's needed within the team as opposed to that explosive offense.
Yeah, and you and I are not so different in the terms of both of us. Like I still think you need to have that CEO style head coach because again, I look at a guy like Kyle Shanahan. He's my favorite coach in the entire league. He falls under that CEO style because he basically looks at his DC and says, "You're going to do this, but I'm also going to call the plays for the offense, but my offensive coordinator is still very much involved in what goes on. It's just I just call the plays." But with that being said, I think the first job we should talk about, I think we should go down the list from number 1 to number 10.
Yeah.
And that is the 49ers job. Again, both of us have said we don't necessarily think this job is going to be available. But if it does become available, I think Ben Johnson goes to the 49ers. I think Ben Johnson is going to be the most attractive head coaching candidate that is not named Kyle Shanahan. And I still think with the 49ers that they are going to want someone that is going to be able to make Brock Purdy's life easy because they're going to give Brock Purdy $70 million a season. And I think they're going to look at it and say, hey, Ben Johnson, do you want to come coach this 49ers team? You had a couple of good running backs, you had a really good wide receiver and a good tight end that hasn't been performing as well this year, but we have one of the best tight ends. We have 3 really good wide receivers. We have a good offensive line. We have the best running back in the league. We have another really good running back behind him, and we also have a Super Bowl caliber defense with only one racist on it. And I think Ben Johnson, he looks at that and goes,
Yeah.
yeah.
He definitely, Ben Johnson honestly, he's going to be the front runner for a lot of these jobs. He is, in my opinion, the top head coaching candidate coming out this year. The part that can make him pump the brakes here is, all right, well, they're a Super Bowl candidate. We're going to be really good next year and the year after that.
But
at
then
that
what's going to
point,
happen
this 49ers
after?
team falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
And so any head coach that takes this job needs to be prepared to also enter a rebuild during their tenure. And so that is going to be the only thing that is a question there. I think if the 49ers make this decision to move on from Kyle Shanahan, there are other good offensive minds out there, but a lot of them come from that Kyle Shanahan tree. I don't think they sidestep into like a Bobby Slowick or somebody who is a similar style.
Someone
to a
that
Kyle
came from
Shanahan.
his tree.
Right? It's going to be like a Ben Johnson. And I floated this to you. This is one of those situations where I could see them just wanting that leadership role and going for somebody that's going to be of a like mind to John Lynch, their general manager, and that's Mike Vrabel, who didn't get a job last year. I could see him being the kind of guy that they bring in going, we just want you to bring everything together and let your coordinators call the plays on this team. And you are basically the daddy
CEO.
of the
Yeah.
team, the CEO. You are running things. You're not calling any plays, though. You are just making sure this is running like a well-oiled machine, because that really is what the 49ers need. They just need somebody to get everything rolling on the same page, everything working smoothly. And Mike Vrabel could be an option there if Ben Johnson is like, I don't want to do a rebuild, because we know Vrabel does. We know Mike Vrabel wants that
He's
opportunity
okay
to
with it.
showcase his ability to build a team from the ground up. That's what he wanted to do with the Titans. The ownership was like, well, no, we don't want to do it your way, though.
Yeah. And here's the thing is that you and I are going to have difference of opinions of who the top 5 coaches are. The one thing I will say is I think Mike Vrabel is going to be what I'm going to deem as the bridesmaid, where he's going to be the bridesmaid for pretty much a lot of these jobs, where he's always going to be in these conversations, but he's going to be number 2. He's going to be number 2 for a lot of these jobs. Again, on my spreadsheet, I have him for a bunch of these jobs, but I think he's ultimately going to be number 2 on a lot of these situations, and the 49ers just so happen to be one of those jobs.
I agree completely. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. He's going to be that number 2 that comes in, and each of these teams is going to choose that offensive coach option as we go down the list. But eventually it's going to reach a point where they're like, well, I mean, this isn't a Bobby Slowick or a Ben Johnson that we're putting up against Mike Vrabel. And eventually Vrabel will win out that battle and likely end up in one of those more rebuilding role jobs. You know, those undesirables that we were looking at, I think is more likely where he ends up. I just think he is a good fit for this position.
Totally.
If nothing else comes to fruition for the 49ers. If all these other coaches go, well, yeah, but we don't want Brock Purdy. You know, we don't want to rebuild, which sometimes you do see with those offensive-minded head coaches. They're just like, no, we want a team that we can coach, call the plays, and win with. We don't want to have to worry about, oh, we need to replace this guy, we need to replace that guy. So that's the only reason I have Mike Vrabel as a viable option there.
And you know what? I didn't initially have Mike Vrabel on my top 3 guys for that list because I had Ben Johnson, Cliff Kingsbury, and Joe Brady. But I do genuinely think that with this discussion that Mike Vrabel would probably be the number 2 on that list for the 49ers. Now moving over to the second team, which again we talked about, is my Chicago Bears. And I know, again, I have to preference this. It's going to sound like this is a homer thing. And again, for me, I've already made the statement that Kyle Shanahan is my favorite coach in the NFL. I truly do believe that if Kyle Shanahan becomes available, that the Bears are going to be the best option for him to go to, because like what I've talked about, they're a team that has a young quarterback. We know what Kyle Shanahan can do. Kyle Shanahan gets Caleb Williams. That is the best quarterback that he's ever worked with. Ever. And he's young. He's on a rookie deal. He has Romo Dunze. He has DJ Moore. He has DeAndre Swift and all the other weapons. And again, the top 50 picks, you're going to be able to work and get that offensive line better. And the defense is still pretty good. And he could come in and just go, hey, Eric Washington, the current DC of the Bears, there's no reason for me to not keep you because you already know this group and I don't need to change anything. I think the Bears are without a doubt the number 1 spot for Kyle Shanahan if he becomes available. If he becomes available, he looks at that Bears job and goes, you know what? This is my Andy Reid spot. Because again, we talk about Sean Payton where he came out and said, oh, if we had the number 1 pick, we were going to take Bo Nix. It's like, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. Everyone needs to shut up about that just because of recency bias and this, and that. Every single team out there, if they had the number 1 pick, they were taking Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was the quarterback everyone was going to take, and I don't want to hear that from Sean Payton. I don't want to hear it from the Commanders. Like, it's one of those things, and I think Kingsbury or Shanahan looked at this and goes, this is my opportunity. I'm staying in the NFC because I'm not making that switch over conferences, but I think Shanahan, he looks at this and goes, I can get this done. I can get this team to the Super Bowl, and I can get them to the promised land.
Yeah, honestly, I have a feeling this is probably the only team that we agree on all the way down the list. Because same thing, if Kyle Shanahan is available, I think this is probably his number one option for a landing position. He there's only one other team really on this list that I could see Kyle Shanahan looking at and going, yeah, I would like that as well. But the Bears is easily the number one. And as I said, this is a team where it has to be that offensive mind, somebody who is going to bring this unit together and have them scoring 30 points a game, because the talent that's on that side of the field, they should not be scoring fewer than 30 points a game. And they can barely score beyond 3 some of these games. That is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so Kyle Shanahan is hands down the number one, with I think Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick being close follows. Ben Johnson, because as we discussed, I think he's going to be a front runner for every single one of these
Yes.
jobs. And Bobby Slowick is kind of like the current Kyle Shanahan Jr. Came from that same sort of that wheelhouse and knows that same thing. Worked with a good young quarterback in CJ Stroud already, and I think Slowick will likely get a job with a younger quarterback this offseason. So if for some reason Shanahan and Johnson aren't available anymore, I think that's the next one into that. But it's going to be one of these offensive minds, most likely, and somebody who's already worked with a young quarterback in developing them to get that Bears job for sure.
Yeah, and for me, I think if Kyle Shanahan isn't available, I do think Ben Johnson is the number one. But the reason why it makes so much sense for Kyle Shanahan to the Bears is because there's been a lot of reports that the Bears, they want a coach with experience, and the biggest link right now is Mike Vrabel, which again, it scares the hell out of me. I want nothing to do with Mike Vrabel as the head coach of the Bears. It's not that I think he's a bad coach. I just don't think you know me. I can't trust a defensive minded head coach to get it done. Again, we didn't see the Titans be super successful under Mike Vrabel either. He had maybe a year or two where it was like, oh, this is really good and it's just strong. But I think for me, if it's not Kyle Shanahan, Ben Johnson is the number one. I don't think Bobby Slowick is an option for the Bears. I do think, however, if it's not Kyle Shanahan or Ben Johnson, it's Lincoln Riley. There's going to be a lot of conversations with that. I think Lincoln Riley, again, head coach of USC, and people are going to go, well, why would he leave USC? He's making ridiculous money at that school. But again, it hasn't been perfect for him there. And the NCAA is likely going to have some things to say with USC and some of the recruiting stuff that has happened. And they're kind of going to clamp down. So USC might just wipe their hands of him. And Lincoln Riley might just say, I know how to work with Caleb. This scares me a little bit because I don't love these brilliant offensive minds from college coming up to the NFL. So Matt one's, Matt Canada, you look at Matt Rule, you even look at Cliff Kingsbury for a time period. Like it scares me. It really, really does. But, and again, I still think Kyle Shanahan, pardon me as a hiccup, he's the number one.
Lincoln Riley is really only an option if that contract with USC gets voided somehow.
Yes.
And he goes, oh, now I'm not making it. Because, they just 2 years ago handed him a 10-year, $110 million contract.
Exactly.
For you to pull him away from that and make him give that up, you're going to have to pay him like QB1 numbers. Unless he loses that and not at his own fault or whatever, however you want to put it, like that's the only way I see him come over. He would be a good fit because he's got that knowledge of Caleb Williams. But again, that is a pigeonhole situation where you could end up where it's like, great, he's good with Caleb Williams, but he can't do anything else.
Yeah.
And so that is a very real concern.
No, I do have confidence in that he will be able to do the head coaching job properly, because I do think, obviously, being a head coach for both Oklahoma and USC, he knows how to be a head coach. But I just worry about him coming up to the NFL, and we see it so often of where these brilliant head coaches in college, they make their way to the NFL, and it's like, well, no, you're not dealing with teenagers. You're not dealing with 20-somethings. You're dealing with grown-ass men that make more money than you.
They try to be too fancy is almost what ends up happening.
but it's one of those things. But moving forward, the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a team that I think is going to be built off of who the head coach is going to be able to vibe with Joe Burrow the best.
Yeah.
And there's a head coaching candidate that we've talked about that has already worked with Joe Burrow and has been wildly successful. Do we all remember that year that Joe Burrow and LSU went undefeated and Joe Burrow threw for like 62 touchdowns? And, his offensive coordinator is currently the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills. Joe Brady is likely going to get a job, and I think Joe Burrow is going to tell whoever the GM is, go get my guy. Remember what happened at LSU? Where me and Jamar Chase played together, ultimately did that. And I think that one is just the sexiest fit. I know there was an article that you particularly read earlier that was like, oh, I'm kind of worried that Ben Johnson will take that role. And I think Ben Johnson would be an amazing fit there as well. But I think they're going to go in and say, Joe Burrow is going to say, bring in Joe Brady. We've worked together. He knows it's not going to be perfect immediately, and we can build this for something for a long-term success.
Yeah, and I agree with both of those as well. You know, that would be a great fit. My issue with it is then the Bengals just look exactly the same. That's the thing. This offense has not struggled to produce. You know, this is another one of those ones where I'm advocating for more of that defensive mind, and I think this would be another situation where Mike Vrabel will enter his name into the conversation because he'll be like, "Hey, I can get this defense built back up, while Joe Burrow and whoever you want as the OC just keeps doing what they're doing." And I find ways to start stopping the other teams from scoring 45 points on us, so Joe doesn't have to score 40 points just to have a shot.
No, and
So that is one
I
that I could definitely see
again, I
happening.
agree with you fully that Mike Vrabel will be a likely candidate for this job. It's just I just think Joe Brady with that connection with Joe Burrow, I just see it too much, man.
No, I get that. This is also a situation in a team where I don't rule out the possibility of them just staying within the organization and promoting Dan Pitcher from the offensive coordinator position into that head coach role just to see what happens, because already knows the system, already familiar with Joe Burrow, already familiar with everything. And so this is one of those situations I could see an in-house promotion happen and just have Dan Pitcher remain and move from that OC to the head coach position with Cincinnati. It's
We
not
just
sexy,
see that
it's not as
so
flashy as
rare.
Joe Brady or anything. It's not a well-known name, but it is something that does track for the Cincinnati Bengals organization as well.
I hear you, and the only reason that I disagree with you is we just see it so rare. I know, again, the possibility of Thomas Brown, the OC, the interim OC for the Bears, is being talked about heavily as the next Bears head coach because he is likely going to be a head coach in the NFL. It's just a matter of time. I just really struggle with that idea of hiring internally after firing the head coach. Like, to me, I look at that and I go, like it's a tough move because I think most of those guys are probably just gonna want to move forward. But I would be more likely to think that it would be Mike Vrabel as opposed to just bringing in your OC and that type of thing. But other than that, like, I would agree with you on what you were saying. It's just I struggle with the idea of just hiring internally.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like, pitcher's not like my number one. That's sort of just that outlier where it's like, okay, well, you know, they couldn't find common ground with Ben Johnson or Joe Brady, and so now they're looking, you know, do we want Vrabel or do we want to just stay within our organization? That's sort of the situation where those other two guys already went somewhere else, and so now they're like, which way do we want to go? And so that's only the only reason I threw that out there, because I think it is a small odds possibility if
For
the
sure.
other options aren't there.
No, totally. And I think both of us, I think I'm locking in for me Joe Brady, and I think you're locking in Mike Vrabel.
I'd say either Ben Johnson or Mike Vrabel more than Joe Brady, just because, like I said, great. You bring Joe Brady in, Joe Burrow throws for 62 touchdowns again and 6,000 yards, breaks all these records, and the Cincinnati Bengals finish at 5-12 still because their defense is still garbage. It's like, great, they put up 45 points a game, but they're letting the other team score 50 this year. That's my concern with Joe Brady.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a very fair concern. I would just have to think that the stipulation would be like, listen, Joe, you're coming in to be the guy, but you also need to realize that this defense needs work and you are going to have to put people in place. And I think it's a lot easier to put defensive minded guys. And again, coming from Buffalo, we know that Buffalo defense is very good. He likely could get that. And hey, Joe Brady, if the Bears can't keep Eric Washington, he can just look at his old buddy Eric Washington and say, hey, you're going to come in and coach this defense and be the DC.
Yeah.
But
and again, don't get me wrong, I like that. There's only 2 other teams that I had really considered for Joe Brady anyway, so that is a good fit, being that he has that familiarity with Joe Burrow.
Fair. Moving now, it is the Las Vegas Raiders. I think the number one person for this job is Cliff Kingsbury. They already hired him as an OC last year, but didn't ultimately get him on a contract because he wanted a 4-year. The Raiders were only offering a 3-year. I think the Raiders look at this because, again, Tom Brady, part owner of the team, he's going to be very influential in this coaching decision. I think he's going to be in all the interviews. He's going to be in all the meetings and basically just go, listen, Cliff, you're an experienced head coach. You know how to develop a quarterback, a rookie quarterback in that, because you did it with Kyler Murray his first year when you were a first-year head coach there with the Cardinals. You did it with Jaden Daniels. We need you to develop our rookie quarterback here. We're going to find you a defensive coordinator that is going to be able to focus on the defensive side of the ball. Again, you'll be able to find guys. And maybe he takes someone over from the Washington staff. And it's one of those things where this just has that feeling of the Raiders. Again, neither of us think that it's a guarantee that Antonio Pierce is going to be fired, but if he is, this just has the hallmarking of this is just one of those glove meets hand perfect fit where the team is going to be looking for someone to develop a rookie quarterback, and this guy has a proven track record of making rookie quarterbacks' lives really easily.
Yeah. And I mean, I agree with you insofar as, Cliff Kingsbury is great with rookie quarterbacks. We've talked several times about how I don't think Cliff Kingsbury is a head coach caliber guy. Like he is an excellent offensive coordinator. He's a great play caller. He's a great player development. He's just not great at leadership. And that is my issue here, because what have the Jags been lacking for years? They almost had with John Gruden until all of a sudden
Raiders,
he's
not
texting a
Jags.
bunch of shit out. What was that?
You said Jags. Raiders, not
Oh,
Jags.
sorry, Raiders, yeah. Either way, this has been an issue for the Raiders team for years. John Gruden was almost that guy, and then he ended up his job due to outside circumstances because he couldn't keep his mouth shut.
And he also wasn't that great as the Raiders head coach either.
He wasn't, but he was bringing the team together without a lot of talent. And that almost is what is known for in Vegas, previously Oakland. They just never had a ton of great talent. They were always just that gritty team, and I just don't think Cliff Kingsbury would see the success there, because you need a strong leader to bring that kind of a team together. For me, like, I think this is one of those jobs where we see one of the young guys who's looking for that opportunity. Again, obviously, Ben Johnson, we said it earlier, he's going to be the front runner for all these jobs.
Yes.
For me, I think Bobby Slowick, this is a good position for him. He's going to get a rookie quarterback. He's going to have that opportunity to just basically build a team from the ground up around a quarterback and himself. And so this would be one of those opportunities where he can showcase what he learned from Kyle Shanahan and have the opportunity to be like, hey, look at me. I truly am Kyle Shanahan 2.0. Look at what I can do. And so that's why he's one of those top candidates for me. I also do see a wild card for the Raiders, because they always tend to go off the books and grab someone random who they're looking to give it a new opportunity to, or a second opportunity to, and that's Brian Flores. I could see them being one of the few teams that offers Brian Flores a new opportunity as a head coach. just because he's got that smash mouth gritty style that we know the Raiders and the Davis family like. It'll be interesting to see, but I think Bobby Slowick's sort of that front runner just because I don't like Cliff Kingsbury myself. It's not outside the realm of possibility for what the Raiders do, though. You know, because much like Brian Flores being that second chance kind of guy, that would be the situation with Cliff Kingsbury. So it does track for what the Raiders do for sure.
Yeah, I look at this and I will say with Brian Flores, I think he should get a second opportunity. I just don't know if he will. Because again, him suing the Dolphins, him suing the league, him suing the Broncos, like he sued like 4 different organizations. And when you, for instance, if he just sued the Dolphins, for all that sort of situations, I think a lot of people understand. But then after he sued the league and then he did this and this, I think you are going to need a team that is in a really comfortable spot and a team that is more than comfortable with the past. I just don't think the Raiders, with Tom Brady being there. Now, if this was just Mark Davis, I could potentially see a little bit more of that, but I think Tom Brady is going to look at that and go, you know what? I respect the hell out of Brian. I know Brian personally. It's just, this is just not going to be that situation. And you and I, like, I understand where you're coming from with Cliff Kingsbury. You and I have talked about it a bunch. I think Cliff Kingsbury is capable of being a head coach. We saw it at Texas Tech. We saw it with the Cardinals because he did have success with both, more so with Arizona than Texas Tech. But I think he has learned from a little bit of it. And I do think he needs to kind of get that mind out of just the offensive philosophy type situation. And we do often see head coaches their second time around often improve a lot on some of those situations, but I do completely understand where you come from with that skepticism because I do have a little bit of it myself.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I could definitely be wrong. He could have learned from his past mistakes and grown, and he could be that guy now. Definitely, like I was very low on Sean McVay early in his head coaching career for that reason. He didn't seem to have that ability to adjust, grow, and bring his team together. But he learned that on the fly, and he got much better. And now he's one of the top coaches in the league. And so that is very possible. Cliff Kingsbury could be that guy. I don't have that trust until I see it.
Exactly. Like it's a tough thing to see, but moving forward to the Jacksonville Jaguars, kind of our last kind of it's that middle peg where it's desirable but not really desirable. And for me, I look at this Jags team and they go with someone who does have coaching experience, but they need to go with that offensive minded guy to just really maximize Trevor Lawrence. And I think they go Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski, again, we talked about him with the Browns where it was just nothing but just shit after shit after shit. And I think he goes in there and he says, you know what? I'm willing to make that opportunity. You saw what I did with Baker Mayfield. You saw what I had to do when I had every other quarterback other than Deshaun Watson, and I didn't even want Deshaun Watson after the second that he touched down in Cleveland. And I tried to make everything work, and I can get him to that next level. And I think this is one of those things where the Jags, they look at him and go, this is our guy. We can feel comfortable with him. Like I think if Kevin Stefanski doesn't get this Jags job, I don't think he takes a job this year, and he just kind of goes down that route of like the Mike Vrabel, where he's gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna take a year off now. And Vrabel is an assist or an advisor for the Browns defense, but he's not really coaching, so he is essentially kind of like taking that year off. But I think Stefanski fits the Jags team because they're in a little bit of a rebuild. They're going to have a really good pick. He's going to be able to work with that. But I think this is just a solid pick for him, I think.
Yeah, I like this. I didn't have Stefanski here, but just you mentioning him, that honestly, that he does. He moves right up to the top of my list for this one for sure. This was, however, the other team I could see a guy like Kyle Shanahan looking at outside of the Bears and going, I like the quarterback. I like what we could do with this team as long as I can get some other pieces around him. And Kyle Shanahan does have that ability to do so. And so I could see this being another spot for him. And the other one that I was looking at here was another spot for Joe Brady, because we've seen what he's done with the Bills this year. You've
Yes.
got a quarterback and nothing else there. And so Brady could look at this and go, well, you know what? I got a quarterback and there's nothing else there, but I can make that work. I've done it with Josh Allen. Granted, Trevor Lawrence is not as good as Josh Allen at this point. You know, originally that ceiling that he had, we talked about maybe he could be in that discussion. And so who knows? Maybe having a guy that can elevate his play will push him back into that top quarterback conversation. And so that is another guy that I could see getting this Jags job. But I really do like Kevin Stefanski. That would be a really good spot for him, and I think would redeem him in a lot of people's eyes, because there's people that are, not a lot of them, but blaming him for what's going on in Cleveland when
Yeah,
really
which
it's not his fault at
it's
all.
not.
He has done such good things there, and you know me, I fucking hate the Browns. So
You
the fact
can't
that I
you
say
almost
that
say
about,
nothing good about that team, and yeah.
yeah, and so that's a good pick for the Jags in Stefanski for sure.
Next up on our list is the Dallas Cowboys, and I think you and I are pretty much lockstep in this one. I think there's only one other candidate for this job if it's not Bill Belichick, and that's Deion Sanders. But I think you're going to have to pay Deion Sanders a ton of money. You're going to have to basically say to him, we're going to trade up to the first pick. We're going to draft your son and do this, this, and that. And I just think it's going to be a little bit too much power for Jerry
Yeah.
to allow to give up. But I think we kind of feel like this move is penciled in already. Like, I think this was the move that Dallas wanted to make last year, but they didn't want to pay McCarthy and Bill Belichick. But you and I just talked about this pre-meeting, and it was pretty simply just like this is where Bill Belichick is likely to land.
Yeah, this was a situation where we were all surprised Bill didn't get a job last year, because he was the front runner for a couple of those jobs.
The
And
Falcons job.
what exactly, the Falcons job was chief among them. And I think a lot of us looked at it and went,
He's
we
holding
know he
out.
wants that Cowboys job, but the Cowboys were still too good last year for them to be able to legitimately fire Mike McCarthy. This year has gone basically according to script for Jerry Jones. The team has started to fall apart. Dak Prescott gets hurt. They're looking at possibly having a top 10 pick, if not a top 5 pick, if
Yep.
they keep playing this badly. And so they can look at it and go, okay, well, sorry, Mike, it didn't work out. We're going to bring Bill Belichick in here and what he did with the Patriots, except I don't think they're going to have as good of a story as they did in New England. But yeah, I think everybody from the end of the coaching carousel last year was looking at this going, yeah, Bill Belichick's going to be the future head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, it's not really a shock to us. And again, the only other guy that I would see is kind of that Deion Sanders, but you're gonna have to do
Yeah.
so much to get him away from
And
Colorado.
ultimately, it's because a lot of these coaches, I think, don't want to deal with Jerry Jones and his antics,
Yeah,
because
well, we talked about that as being a big
you're not
reason.
only coaching the team, but you have to put out the fires that Jerry Jones creates in the meantime. And so you're basically head coach and head of PR,
Yeah,
which is a very tough thing to do. Bill Belichick, we all know how he does handle media, and that's why he's a very good fit for that, because he will just basically deadpan stare at you when you ask a dumb question, and he next. Like, that's all you'll get, which is what this Cowboys team needs, really.
yeah, and we might even just get what we see from Bill Belichick now in the media, where he's actually pretty hilarious and he just gives straight up
Yeah.
hilarious responses. We don't know, but this one feels like it's already done. If we're just waiting for the season to end, like
Yeah.
on Black Monday, which again is the day after the season ends, it feels like that Tuesday is going to be the Cowboys announcing that Bill Belichick is the new head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, after Monday of them announcing that they have not re-signed Mike McCarthy because he is on the last year of his deal.
Right. And then Wednesday, we'll hear the announcement from the league going they're investigating Cowboys for not being inclusive in their head coaching search.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they'll have to give up like a 5th round draft pick for not following the
Exactly.
rules. But next up on our list is the New York Giants. And again, this is just one of those teams where you're going to be in just that awkward situation. And I feel like this is going to be one of those teams where the head coach that is hired is going to be an offensive minded guy, because they're going to have to bring in one of those young quarterbacks that you're going to have to develop. And I think Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator for the Ravens, he's going to likely sneak in and get one of these jobs. He's done a phenomenal job this year or the last 2 years with Lamar Jackson. And I could see if the Giants decide to draft Jalen Milroe, kind of that similar style of player to Lamar Jackson. He could be a pretty solid fit right there. And like he's one of the lower named guys, but I feel like then again, because the Giants are going to be pretty low on the desirability list, it's going to be like, hey, Todd Monken, you might be a year ahead of schedule in terms of your head coaching opportunities to get that job. But with this right here, right now, I just feel like they might like this is just kind of like a good fit because whoever they bring in, they're going to need to develop that quarterback. We've seen him definitely make Lamar Jackson a better passer over these few months, and this just feels right.
Yeah, this was a hard one for me just because this is going to be such a big rebuilding team and such a project.
Yeah.
I mean, for that reason, honestly, one of my front runners was again Mike Vrabel for this because we know how keen he is to get into an organization where he can build a team from the ground up. The problem is, like you said, this is a situation where you don't already have an established quarterback, and Vrabel's not going to be able to develop that. And so you have to then hope you get a really good OC that doesn't jump ship after 2 years. And so that's where that becomes difficult. This Giants team and the decisions they've been making lately, though, I don't know. This could be one of those ones where I could see them doing a bonehead move and staying in house and promoting Shane Bowen to head coach after they fire Brian Daboll and just basically perpetuating this cycle for the next couple of years anyway before they finally have Daniel Jones off the books and then start looking again. I don't know. This Giants job, it's going to be a messy one, and I think it is most likely to see a guy where it's out of the blue, somebody from college, some OC from somewhere that we weren't expecting, sort of like the Zach Taylor situation where it's a guy that just sort of falls into it because nobody really wants it,
That's
and
kind of why I had the idea of Todd Monken because again, he's not
exactly.
one of those top offensive guys, but he has worked well with a quarterback that is playing like an MVP, and he's done it for 2 years
It really just
now.
it depends, I think, who the quarterback ends up being drafted in New York. That's the toughest thing. It's one of those ones where you almost do and don't want to hire the coach before you draft the quarterback. Like
Yeah.
they got to get this perfect. You got to make sure that whoever you bring in as GM, as head coach, they're on the same page. You get the guy drafted that they both want. Like everything has to work perfectly for this to be a good situation. And that's the only reason I think one of those more leadership style guys might get in there like a Mike Vrabel where it's like, yeah, we don't know what we're going to get. And so it's do your best with what you end up with. And as long as you're not basement team for the next 3 years, we can build something.
Yeah, and this just kind of goes back to that situation that I've talked so much about with Mike Vrabel, where he's just going to be the bridesmaid. I think
Yep.
this is just one of those situations where everything that you're saying in this situation makes total sense for Mike Vrabel, but again, he's just going to be that bridesmaid where it's going to be like
It doesn't make sense for the Giants. That's just
yeah, yeah, it might make all the sense in the world for Mike Vrabel, but
Yep.
there. Next up is the New Orleans Saints. And for me, again, this is just one of those teams where the cap situation is just going to be such a pain in the ass to deal with. And for me, I put Bobby Slowick in this spot. Bobby Slowick has been under a lot of fire this year. Like there's people in Houston that are asking for him to be fired. I think that is way too out of proportion. I still think he's a good head coach, but there's definitely been some cracks and chinks in the armor this year. When he was pretty much the number 2 offensive minded guy that was rated to get a head coaching job last year, only behind Ben Johnson, didn't get hired, went back to the Texans. It was okay. Well, he's going to be the number 2 guy next year anyways, behind Ben Johnson. So it's just basically him getting a little bit of that extra seasoning. And I think this year for him, I actually think Bobby Slowick, if he doesn't get a job like this Saints team, he's probably going to end up staying as the OC for the Texans, because I think there's going to be a lot more teams that are a little bit scared off of it. Went from such highs to kind of just a little bit of more of that mediocre kind of season, what we're seeing from CJ Stroud and that offense. Now he's going to ultimately go say, listen, the offense was hurt and we just couldn't do anything, or we do as much as we hoped for, and this and that. And I think that's why a handful of these other teams are ultimately going to be scared away from him a little bit, is because we did see that kind of going from here to down to here type level. And I think the Saints will look at it and go, hey, we're ready for the long haul here, man. We're ready for you to be the head coach for the next 5 years, and we understand this, that, and the other thing. But I think the Saints is probably going to be the best fit for Bobby Slowick. And it's unfortunate because you're going to have to watch that team be really, really, really bad. And, we're kind of seeing the Saints offense kind of go up and down with their current offensive coordinator. And I think Bobby Slowick comes in there. He goes, listen, give me 5 years and we can see what happens. And he's going to be one of those coaches that's going to be there for 5 years. And if it works out really well, we're going to go, that was a smart move by the Saints to keep him around. But if it's not, it's going to be like, okay, well, he was put into a really bad situation. We might be looking at him being the next Kevin Stefanski, of where it's going, like, man, like he went to a bad team in a bad situation and just tried to make the most out of it, had a little bit of success, and ultimately he just had to get away from the bad organization and there. But I feel like this is a solid spot for Bobby Slowick.
Yeah, and I mean, surprisingly, I actually agree. This is the one job that I had Bobby Slowick as the front runner for, really. Well, two of them, but I mean, this was the favorite I think that I had him in, because it's a full pure rebuild opportunity for him to showcase all those skills. It's going to be a tough slog. The concern is if it doesn't work out, he could potentially ruin his chances at another opportunity early on in his career here. So
without a doubt, it's risky as hell.
Concerning. This is also the one spot that I think Mike Vrabel could win as the bridesmaid, because it is much like that Giants. It is going to be a pure rebuild. They're going to let him come in, clear house essentially, and he's going to basically be able to patchwork a team together for the first 2 years, which I think is really what he wants to do, and then build through the draft after that. And so this is a situation where I think he could endear himself to the ownership in that way, going, look, this is what I want. We're going to be bad for a couple of years, but we're going to get back to the promised land. And I think Vrabel this could be the one where he beats out one of those offensive minds with his ability to be a leader.
Yeah, it's hard for me to disagree with you on that one. I think it's pretty much going to be Bobby Slowick and Mike Vrabel flipping a coin at this point for both of them, because I think
do we want offense? Do we want defense?
Yeah, and it's do you want the guy with the experience that's defense, or do you want the guy that has the bright offensive mind? Yeah, we know that he came from that Shanahan tree, and he's worked with a young quarterback, and we're likely going to have to draft a young quarterback early, because again, if the Saints get Archie Manning, you're gonna want a guy that's already established his coaching situation there. And again, the Saints, Archie Manning would be a perfect spot for, or the Saints would be a perfect spot for Archie Manning to go, because he's from New Orleans. I know you want that, but buddy,
everybody wants him. I know
you're gonna have to be the first overall pick to get him. Are you willing to sacrifice next year the entirety just to get him? The answer might be yes. I mean, like, if I was a team that needed a quarterback, I would probably say yeah, but
yeah, I know that's a discussion for another day.
Yes. That is the off-season kind of brain rot that we do during the off-season when we have nothing else to talk about.
Exactly.
The Cleveland Browns job, again, we just get to this point of just pure and utter just ugh. For me, my coach candidate that I have here is Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Buccaneers these last 2 years, they've done a very good job at pumping out head coaching candidates. Dave Canellis last year went to the Panthers, and I think we kind of had that similar conversation of where that wasn't a great job for anyone that wanted to be a head coach to go to, but he saw his opportunity. And I think Liam Cohen, with the success that he's had this year with that Tampa Bay team, I think you're going to likely see another scenario where he gets hired away because he's done so well. Again, he can say, listen, I've made Baker Mayfield look like this great quarterback without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin. Can Dave Canales say that? No, he can't. So I'm the guy that comes in and does this. And that might actually not be the proper messaging to say to the Browns of going, look what I did with Baker Mayfield. But it will
Right.
it could be a situation of going, yeah, I can make quarterbacks look good. I can make Deshaun, but we're definitely gonna draft one, right? We're gonna draft a quarterback, right? Yeah, please, please.
See, and right there is going to be the biggest hurdle that this Browns team has to overcome in getting a head coach is I think every candidate that walks into that room, the first thing they're going to say is, I want Jameis Winston, not Deshaun Watson.
Yeah.
Because you see how Jameis is playing right now, and he's got the heart and the fire, and he's got that team rallied around him.
Yes.
Whereas Deshaun Watson gets out there, and everybody sits 2 or 3 seats away because they don't want a hand on their thigh. And so that's going to be the biggest thing for them. And for me, the guy I had penciled in here for the front runner is Joe Brady, a guy who with Buffalo was able to take a team with a good quarterback and nothing around him, which the Browns, they've got a little bit more talent. They got a Jerry Jeudy who's sort of a cast off. They've got Nick Chubb who looks like he might be coming back. David Njoku, so there's some more talent there. I think Joe Brady could be the guy that might be the only one willing to try and work with Deshaun Watson to the point where it doesn't work out, and then he goes, okay, now I got Jameis Winston, who is a guy who's right in his wheelhouse, who loves to sling that ball, who loves to take chances, which is, that describes Josh Allen perfectly, really. And that's what I think the Browns have in Jameis Winston right now. If they can find a way to get Deshaun Watson out of there, even if he's still on the books, Joe Brady is the kind of guy who could still see success with this team, even without having the star, high-paid contract talent to go along with it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying with this one, and I think that is a possibility as well. I just worry that if Joe Brady, he could be in this scenario similar to what we saw with Ben Johnson last year, where it was, well, if I don't get to really have what I want, why would I go with you if I can just go back to my cushy job back in Buffalo, hang out with Josh Allen, and just have another year on the books of where people are just gushing over my talents and going, we want that guy. And I think, again, I this is why I think the Browns are going to be similar to that Bengals job from a few years ago to the Panthers job last year, where it's just going to be no one wants this job, and it's going to be this guy comes in, it's going like, you know what, he's been the only one that's really showed enthusiasm. He might be a year or two ahead of his coaching or his head coach responsibilities, and I think they potentially just they fall down that road. But again, with what you're saying with Joe Brady, I can't disagree with you on that one.
See, and I agree with you completely there. Like, Joe Brady was sort of just the only guy I could see maybe being willing. I don't think any of these guys that we've talked about are going to want this job. That's just it. This was one of those ones where I almost wanted to just take the top 20 OCs or college guys that are there, just give them each a number and roll a D20, and whatever it lands on, that's the guy I pick, because that really is how undesirable this job. Like, we don't even have this as the worst job, but because of Deshaun Watson,
It makes it feel like
really
it's the
makes
worst
it like
job.
this 9 and 10, it's 9A and 9B.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather have the Jets job than the Browns job. The Browns is just more enticing because at least they do have some pieces in some places that aren't already disgruntled. You've got a guy like Myles Garrett who is pounding the table going, no, I am retiring a Brown.
Yes.
The Jets don't have anybody like that. That's the only reason really that I see this Browns job being a little bit more desirable than Jets. But I don't think anybody that is a viable candidate is actually going to want it, because I even had Mike Vrabel written in on this one because of that leadership ability. But I even think he looks at it and goes,
No, I'm good.
nah, I'll go be an analyst with ESPN this year instead of doing that. Because
Yeah, well,
I know
and
he's
he's already
an advisor there right
yeah.
now,
So he already sees
but
the chaos and
that's
mess.
just it. He's seeing the inner workings of that team already, I think, and I think he's looking at it and going, I
I'm
don't know. But that's
good.
why I had him penciled in, because he's already sort of within the organization. So that could be something where if he's seen something he likes and he gets along with the ownership, they may just go, well, Stefanski, walk, do you want it? And he'll basically go yes or no.
Yeah, it was kind of like what I thought when we saw Brian Flores. He was with the Steelers, and it was like, oh, he's the perfect replacement for when Mike Tomlin decides to retire. Like, both of us had that thought, and that still might be the situation. They just might have to hire him away from Minnesota
Yeah.
in a few years. But yeah, I agree with you. I just think it's just so undesirable. It's going to be really, really hard for any head coach to really, or any coaching candidate to really feel comfortable with that. And I just feel like it's going to be one of these random offensive coordinators that has had a shockingly good year with their quarterback. And it's going to be like, oh, he gets it. And we're going to sit back and go, yeah, he didn't really deserve the head coaching. He doesn't deserve to be a head coach yet, but he saw an opportunity and he jumped at it. And this leads us all the way to the New York Jets at this point, and where it has just been an absolute chaotic mess. And for me, this is the first time that I actually have Mike Vrabel at the top of my list, because again, I think there's going to be so many teams that we've talked about where he's just been the bridesmaid, and finally it's going to be like, hey, like I think the Jets are probably going to be the last team, funny enough, to find their head coach, even though they were the first team to fire their head coach. It's just going to be ding, 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 and they're just going like, we wanted that guy, we wanted that guy, we wanted that guy. Okay, Mike, come in for an interview. Okay, he's impressive. He says he's willing to do a rebuild. Okay, Mike, here's the job. And like, I kind of feel bad for Brable in this scenario, because I still think he's a good coach. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I know I get labeled as the defensive minded head coach hater, and I am. Like, I will fully take that crown. Like, I'm putting it on. I wear it with a badge of honor. Well, I still think Vrabel is a good coach, and I think he will land a job. And I think if he can come in and say to the Jets and say to Woody Johnson, whoever the general manager will be, and go, listen, you want to build this team, you need to give me a few years. We're not far away. We'll bring in the right coordinator. Let's get the right quarterback, and let's just try to get this thing done. But just know it's not going to be immediate. It's going to be a little bit slow. And now a lot of people might say, well, you're just kind of going from one defensive minded guy to the other when you fired Robert Saleh to this. But again, it's, why would anyone want to go to the Jets right now? They are just in such a clusterfuck.
This is going to be hilarious. The Jets is one of the teams I don't think Mike Vrabel wants to touch at all, if I'm being honest. I didn't even have him on my list for the New York Jets. I do have a defensive mind here, but it's not him. My front runner is much like that Saints job. It's Bobby Slowick. You know, if he doesn't land that Saints job, this could be another position where he looks at it and goes, you guys have a high enough draft pick. You're probably going to get a quarterback. If you don't, they're likely going to be the front runners for guys like Justin Fields and some of these other backups that are fringing on starters that he might look at and go, if I can get that guy, I've got Breece Hall. If we can convince, I'm forgetting the wide receiver.
Garrett Wilson.
Not Devontae.
Garrett Wilson.
Garrett Wilson. If we can convince him to stay, then we've got a solid 1, 2, 3 to start out with. The O-line isn't terrible in New York. Like, they've spent years building it up. The issue's been injuries. Like, they just keep getting hurt. That's the problem. If they can stay healthy, they have potential to be one of the better O-lines. So that's why I think Bobby Slowick is one of the front runners for this one if he can't get something like the Saints. And
but you said you had a DC in mind.
I do, because the Jets are the second chance organization. And that's why this is the other spot that I could see giving Brian Flores an opportunity. And Brian Flores is going to look at this and go, man, that defense with guys like Hassan Reddick and everything they've got, I could turn this into like the biggest blitzing nightmare for so many teams in the league. And I think he would chomp at that and go, Sure, our offense might suck because who knows what's going on with that OC because I'm not paying attention to it. But he would have a lot of fun with the defensive talent that is on this Jets organization. And he could bring this Jets team to being a top 3 defense, if not the number 1, with his play calling and his scheme ability as a defensive mind. That's why I think Brian Flores would be a more likely to Mike Vrabel for this job.
Yeah, I hear you. I think Aaron Glenn is also a possibility for this job, the Lions defensive coordinator. I know he was in some head coach conversations last year, and he ultimately kind of did the same thing with Ben Johnson when I'm good with all these, I'll go home, hang out for another year. Now, Lions defense hasn't necessarily been great, but they're going to look at that from the leadership standpoint. It's just this Jets job is just so messy, man. But it is going to be really interesting. Again, we're going to have this conversation when we finally do get all of the head coach firings done at the end of the year. We're likely going to have this conversation a little bit more seriously because this is more of a fun thought experiment at this point in the year.
Yeah, it's about that time of the year where we've seen multiple coaches get fired. This weekend, we could potentially see 1 or 2 more let go after these games if they go badly enough in the last couple of days as we've been watching. It definitely won't be the Bears. The Bears are going to surprise the Vikings, and all of a sudden it's going to be Eberflus as the head coach for the next 10 years.
Stop that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's what you get. But no, we will have this talk much more seriously as we get to what's known as Black Monday, when all those firings come out. We see what jobs are actually available. We're going to have a better idea of what the draft board is going to look like, because around that time, I know Brendan likes to do another mock draft around then, just so we can really start to solidify, see where these rookie quarterbacks are going, see which teams are going to be looking to rebuild on their defense, all that sort of stuff. So these choices will likely change once we reach the off season. But for right now, this really was just sort of, that spitball of who looks like they're going to fit these jobs if they're available.
Indeed. And we'd like to thank you all very much for watching. I know this was a little bit of a longer one, starting with the Daniel Jones discussion and then ultimately doing this. But again, we like these thought experiments. Again, the football world, it's pretty much the game picks. We kind of give you a lot of our stuff, and there really hasn't been any insane news, but this is a fun thought experiment for us to do at this point. But for Sterling, I'm Brendan saying thank you all very much for watching. Peace.